Hi, I'm Jim from BATS Research and Training, and welcome to a sneak peek at the BAT License Training Program. Last month, I posted the first video just providing a very short insight to some of the training that we provide on the BAT License Training Program. And we started off with the first unit, legislation, licensing and planning. Moving on to the second session, we covered Unit 2 called Considerations for BAT Surveys. And when I talked about legislation, licensing and planning, I talked about how it's a little bit dry. It's nobody's favorite topic, but clearly it's really important because it lays the foundation for so much of what we do in bat conservation. And considerations for bat surveys, it may not mean much to you at first. Kind of, what does that mean? What does that comprise? And so really, again, we don't quite get stuck into the bats just yet, because we have to consider a range of things when we're thinking about planning or undertaking bat surveys, and that's what this unit covers. So we start off by thinking about, first of all, well, why? Why do we conduct surveys for bats? Only when we have that very clear in our mind are we likely to be able to plan good surveys, get good results, and then have those good results feed into things like impact assessments and mitigation schemes, etc. And it comes down to largely, understanding what project we're working on, what the likely impact's going to be, all of those types of things. But then even moving on to things such as what are the questions that we're trying to answer when we're conducting bat surveys as well. So we discuss things such as assessing impacts. How do we go about that for a particular project, whatever it is that we're working on? And there's various different aspects we can consider here. So it may be that we're dealing with a project that's likely to have a positive impact. And in this photograph here is an example of a water treatment plant, where they took a corner of an agricultural field that was fairly kind of inert and lacking in biodiversity, and they installed a number of filtration ponds, and as a result have a kind of fantastic benefit for the local ecosystems and local wildlife, etc. However, most of the projects we work on are unlikely to be kind of resulting in an overall positive impact. And of course, we need to consider the negative impacts as well. We would consider things such as the extent of the development we're working on. And, very rarely do we work on something this small. So this is a wildlife tower that's being produced, and clearly the impact of that should be beneficial for bat species locally, because it's designed to incorporate bat roosting opportunities. But of course, then the extent ranging maybe up to hundreds of houses or nationally important infrastructure projects. So extent comes into play. We think about things such as magnitude. If you think about surveying this building, the potential impact would be very different if we were thinking about re-roofing it or renovating it compared to if we were thinking about demolishing the building. So magnitude comes into it as well. We talked about kind of duration as well, and kind of a series of Google aerial images here, thinking about kind of the time over which these things happen. And we can kind of see this kind of gradual urban sprawl here towards a local woodland. So just kind of some of the various things we would consider when we're thinking about impact assessments. We discuss things such as limitations. And when we're talking about limitations, good practice is to identify what that limitation is. So be open and transparent about it. So whoever's reading the survey report understands that there was a limitation, but also understands how you treated it as well. So the first thing we do is we state what the limitation was. So for example, on the previous slide, we have an example of weather. And I'm sure we've all been out undertaking bat surveys where the weather hasn't been the best. And so that is likely to provide a limitation to the survey. It could be the season is wrong. So it's unlikely that I'm sat here in December, unlikely we're going to be going out and doing many bat surveys in terms of activity surveys, emergent surveys, transect surveys at this time of year, because that would be a significant limitation. We are very unlikely to record bats during that time. Could be that access is a limitation. If you can't physically get inside a building, for example. So once we've stated what the limitation was, we also then talk about how significant we think that limitation is, and then identify any steps that we took to try and overcome that limitation. And that really then paints the whole picture and tells the whole story about the limitations and how we approach them. We talk about good practice guidance and kind of places to go to find out information that will help us design and implement our surveys. And we kind of talk about the kind of whole suite of those. One of the big ones, of course, is the good practice guidance from the Bat Conservation Trust, which is a fantastic document, and one of the ones that we refer back to time and time again through the course of training. But of course, we also talk a little bit about when it may be appropriate to deviate from good practice guidance. So here we have a slide kind of illustrating this, and we're having a bit of a discussion here about how there may be ways that we can improve on that good practice guidance. So the photo here illustrating the fact that there's a kind of general shift at the moment of moving away from emergent surveys for surveying trees for bats towards aerial inspections of some form, most typically climbing inspections. Because when we undertake climbing inspections, we are more likely to find evidence of bats. So you get kind of all the context really, don't you? So you get things like whether there are droppings there, you might be able to pick up on squeaks or sounds, you might be able to pick up on smells, you might be able to pick up on the substrate of the interior of the feature that you're looking at. Compared to if you were undertaking an emergence or re-entry survey, where it's kind of binary of yes, no, are the bats present on that day? And as we know, bats switch roosts quite frequently. And so undertaking one or two emergent surveys is very unlikely to find bat roosts in trees. We even talk about things such as the various pieces of legislation that we need to be mindful of as well. And one of the big ones is the Health and Safety at Work Act. So we talk a bit about, what the key points are, who it applies to, and how it may affect bat surveys. So we have a kind of Jamboard session where people are broken up into groups, and then the trainees put their thoughts about these different aspects of this piece of legislation onto a Jamboard, and then we come back and discuss it. And we go through a few different pieces of legislation. So that was Health and Safety at Work Act. We cover things such as the LOLA regs, so lifting operations and lifting equipment regulations. We also talk about PURE, provision of use of work equipment regs, work at height regs, all of those types of things, because these things come into play when we're thinking about planning and undertaking our bat surveys. So that's it. A bit of a fairly short video, just providing a bit of an insight into session 2 of the Bat License Training Program, the considerations for bat surveys. I will be back next month. And we're kind of getting into the meat a bit more next month, because we're going to talk about ecological considerations for bat surveys, i.e. bat ecology and biology. It's in that kind of the topic that most people are interested in. And so maybe see you then.